There is so much misinformation out there about the low FODMAP diet. If you are sitting here thinking that you have to be low FODMAP for life, then we have really good news for you. The low FODMAP diet is actually a learning journey that helps you identify your food triggers and then relax your diet. We're here today to educate you about the 3 phases of the low FODMAP diet. My name is Alana Scott. I am your host today from A Little Bit Yummy. And joining me is Lyndal Collins. Lyndal is a Monash trained dietitian from the Monash FODMAP team, and she's here to share all of her knowledge and tips with us. Hello, Lyndal.
Hi, Alana. Hi, everybody.
Thank you so much for joining us today. So obviously the low FODMAP diet is a super complex topic and there's lots of moving parts to it. So the first thing I wanted to ask you is, could you briefly explain what the 3 different phases are?
Sure. So, as you mentioned, it is a bit of a learning journey, the low FODMAP diet. So, the first phase that we start with is known sort of as the restrictive or elimination phase. Some of those names are sometimes used interchangeably. And it's basically where we want to be reducing the amount of FODMAPs in our diet overall down to a quite low level, with the aim of improving our IBS symptoms. And then we move on to stage 2. I think we'll go a bit more into each stage at some point.
We will in a minute. We'll give you some tips for each stage as well. So what stage 2 is what? What happens next?
So stage 2 is then called reintroduction. So reintroduction involves going through a process of reintroducing different types of high FODMAP foods to identify sort of which FODMAPs you might be sensitive to as an individual. And yeah, it's a bit of a kind of trial and error process that we go through to work out those foods that could be triggering your IBS symptoms.
And that brings us to the 3rd phase. So what is phase number 3?
Phase number 3, we refer to as personalization. So it's about developing a diet for you in the long term that only restricts the foods and the FODMAPs that we've found during phase 2 that trigger your symptoms or you're particularly sensitive to. So it's about reintroducing all of those foods back into your diet that don't trigger your symptoms and just focusing on those hopefully few foods that are particular problems for you.
That is fantastic to know. So as you just heard, there are 3 phases. This is a learning journey and you are not stuck in any phase for life. So don't sit there feeling anxious about that. So before you mentioned that phase 1 is our sort of elimination or restriction phase where we've reduced our FODMAP load. Hopefully we're experiencing improved symptoms. How long should you stay in this first phase for?
Well, the good news here, Alana, is this phase is only very short typically and quite temporary. So for most people, they're going to find an improvement in their symptoms after 2 to 6 weeks. So it's really not a long-term thing that we're going to be following. It's just until we notice an improvement in our symptoms. And then we're going to be looking on to move to phase 2 as soon as that happens, basically, and as soon as we're ready.
That is good to know. So don't wait too long before jumping into the next phase. Lots of you are probably sitting there wondering, okay, so I'm in this restriction phase. I'm meant to be eating low FODMAP foods. Where do you go to get up-to-date low FODMAP foods? Because Google is not your friend here.
No, Google is not your friend. The problem, I guess, with using Google and all the random food lists that will pop up is they often contain outdated information. So your best bet for the most up-to-date and accurate FODMAP information is to download the Monash FODMAP app, which contains a database of, I've lost count of how many foods are in there now, but it's many thousands of foods. I think it's possibly thousands at this point. I'm not sure. Could be into the 1,000. Many foods, essentially. And we'll give you FODMAP information about the majority of foods that are commonly found in your supermarket and your fresh fruits and veggies.
That is brilliant. The Monash app is kind of like your FODMAP buddy in your pocket. Now, you do
Yes.
have to pay for this app, which stops a lot of people from downloading it. However, the money you pay goes straight back into FODMAP research. So not only are you helping yourself, but you're also helping your fellow community members when you download the app. So it's worth the money. And if you see a conflict online between the Monash University app and an online resource, then the online resource is most likely the one out of date. So always go with that app.
Yes.
Now, Lyndal, do you have any other quick tips for starting this first phase?
Oh, some quick tips. I think my biggest one would just be to be prepared. So once you've kind of done your research, got your information, downloaded the Monash FODMAP app and done all the reading in there, there's a great start the diet section in the app when you first open it that has some fantastic reading and resources around how to get started. Finding a good time to start when you're not too busy, maybe you don't have too many social engagements coming up that are going to be difficult to cater to your new dietary requirements, is probably a good time to do it. And also just looking at things like creating a low FODMAP shopping list, going through your pantry and making sure you're well stocked with low FODMAP options for foods that you would commonly eat normally. So just making those swaps. And it's great to get support from a dietitian there who will be able to give you some really good suggestions based on your current diet, what you might be able to swap those things for, and what are the low FODMAP options for you to choose from.
Absolutely. It's not about deleting foods out of your diet. It's more about swapping in those lower FODMAP options. So those are fantastic tips.
Exactly.
Okay, we're going to jump across to phase 2. If you're still panicking about phase 1, don't worry. There is another FODMAP chat video floating around that covers starting the low FODMAP diet in depth. So go off and find that video. There's also plenty of information on the monashfodmap.com blog or on a little bit yummy.com if you need it. So, Lyndal, phase 2 is the reintroduction phase. This is kind of where you do the most learning about your body. How does the reintroduction phase work? Are you testing particular foods, or are you eating foods because they contain a particular FODMAP group?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's sort of a bit of both, and there are quite a few different approaches you can take to reintroduction. But essentially, what we want to try and do through reintroduction is see how you tolerate foods that were reduced or eliminated from your diet during phase 1, but foods that are important to you and your regular diet and part of your regular routine. So they're the foods that we want to focus on getting back in, because they're the ones you enjoy and that are going to make the biggest difference to your diet and your lifestyle in the long term, I guess. So you can take a few different approaches, but working with a dietitian again here is usually the best option if you have access to one, as they can really personalize this particular phase to you. But what it essentially involves, in a nutshell, is completing a number of what we call food challenges. So that's where we're focusing on usually one FODMAP type at a time, because we have our different groups of FODMAPs, and choosing a food that is only high in that particular one FODMAP type and reintroducing that food in a small amount that we gradually increase over several days according to how you tolerate that food. So it sounds a little bit complicated, but again, there is support for that reintroduction process with some suggested foods and suggested quantities of those foods as well that you can find in the diary section of the Monash FODMAP app.
I was just going to say that's a really good place to start. And don't forget that when you're exploring the food diary of the Monash FODMAP app, you can tap into each food and it's going to tell you exactly what FODMAP groups are in those foods as well. So you can slowly build up sort of like a picture of what foods are problematic based on your challenges and then sort of apply that to those other areas. Lyndal, when people think about these FODMAP reintroductions, they often get quite anxious because they've just done that first phase of the diet. They might be feeling great for the first time in ages and experiencing minimized symptoms. So what are your quick tips for someone who's feeling anxious, who's really worried about starting this reintroduction phase?
Yeah, I guess to start with, it's so normal and natural to be feeling that way. Like you said, you might be feeling really great for the first time in a very long time. So be kind to yourself. These are normal feelings to have. But I think a good thing to focus on is see the reintroduction step as a real opportunity to get those foods back into your diet that you love, potentially. So hopefully what we're going to find during reintroduction is that there's only a small number of foods that are real problematic triggers for you that you might need to adjust or avoid for a while. But there's going to be all these other foods that are not triggers, and that you can then reintroduce back into your diet. And this is really going to help you then be able to engage with confidence in social functions again, and know that when you go out and eat, that these are your safe, don't really like the word safe, but these are your sort of
Go-to foods.
Go-to foods, yes, that's probably a better word for it. These are your go-to foods, and you've got this kind of repertoire of foods that you can choose from now, that you know you're going to feel okay if you eat those foods. It also kind of helps in the long run to reduce your anxiety, to know what those specific triggers are. So if you know, for example, that garlic is a really strong trigger for you, and you choose to go out and eat something that has that, and then you experience symptoms, at least you know what that, why you've experienced symptoms. So there's that kind of clarity as well around just knowing and being empowered with that knowledge of what your triggers are, and then being able to make those decisions around when you might not be willing to eat those, depending on how you're feeling.
Absolutely. It gives you more confidence in your body, understanding your personal triggers. I've been through the journey myself, and I'm pretty sure Lyndal has been through a lot of this journey. A lot of this journey too. The other thing is understanding your triggers makes it a lot easier when you're trying to ask the chef to leave something out of your meal too, because you can say, hey, garlic and onion are my biggest triggers. We're pretty much good, providing you don't put those in my meal. So
yes.
so that's really useful, and some great tips there. So that brings us to a quick chat about our third phase, which is this personalization phase. Does the personalization phase look the same for everyone?
No. So I guess, as the name sort of suggests, it's designed to be a phase where you personalize the diet for the long term. So of course it's going to be different for each individual. And this is really based on all the information that you've learnt in step 2 of the diet, particularly, so that reintroduction, where you've gone through and identified which foods or which types of FODMAPs might be particularly problematic for you and strong triggers of your symptoms. And then it's about thinking in the long term, how am I going to manage this? So there might be, say we go back to garlic again, you identify that garlic is a really strong trigger for you, but you might find that if there's just a tiny amount of garlic in something, you're okay. Whereas if there's larger amounts, game over, essentially. So it's about having that information to know where that level of tolerance is for you, where your kind of leeway is, I guess, with certain foods. And then you can apply that in the long term to know, okay, these are my, these are my repertoire of foods that I know are going to be fine for me. These are the ones that I might need to be a bit more cautious of. But yeah, it's having that information and personalizing it to you in the longer term so that you can enjoy a wider variety of foods again.
That makes sense. So it's completely okay if your personalization journey looks completely different to one of your gut buddies out there. You shouldn't have the same personalization pathway. It's okay if they react to something else and you don't react to that food. One thing that we see a lot in terms of a frequently asked question is, can your FODMAP tolerances change over time? And when in this personalization phase should you consider coming back and retesting some of those FODMAP groups that you maybe still find a challenge to bring back into your diet?
Absolutely great question. So really, I guess the personalization phase, again, it's quite dynamic. Is probably a good word. Just like our gut is dynamic, and our gut microbiome is constantly changing as well. So the little guys that live in there and make it make it their home, they're always changing and adapting according to our diet and our lifestyle and other outside influences. So because of this, because of the dynamic nature of our gut and our lives in general, absolutely your tolerance can change over time. So what we sort of recommend is trying to reintroduce those foods that you've identified as particular triggers for you again, really whenever you want in the future. But at minimum, I'd say probably every 3 to 6 months, kind of coming back to that list of foods that you know seem to be problematic for you and going, maybe I'll try reintroducing this one again, or and just being flexible with it, because we often find that tolerances are going to change quite dramatically over time. Things like pregnancy can really change things. You can speak to that one too, Alana, at the moment.
Yeah.
But all sorts of things like that that happen in your life can really change your gut environment and how you respond to FODMAPs. So definitely worthwhile reintroducing and not having a blanket rule around, I can never eat this again.
Exactly. We don't like blanket rules when it comes to food intolerances. So it's really, really good that you've brought that up. So basically, my take home message from what you've just said is that personalization phase looks different for everyone. It's a phase where you come and experiment with the foods that you've passed during your FODMAP reintroduction challenges, and you bring those back into your diet. And then it's good to every now and then go back and retest any groups you struggle with, because you might get a really pleasant surprise and find out that you've now got those extra levels of tolerance for that FODMAP group. So that has been awesome. Thank you so much for your time today, Lyndal. It's been a real pleasure chatting to you about the 3 phases of the low FODMAP diet. And I'm sure everyone listening in has got some good tips out of this session.
You're welcome, Alana, and thank you. And I hope it's been really insightful for everyone listening today.
Thank you, Lyndal. Now, just to remind you, if you want to support the work that Monash University is doing, please go down and download the Monash University FODMAP Diet app. You can grab that off the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store. You can also find lots of information about the different phases that we've been talking about today on monashfodmap.com or on alittlebit.yummy.com. We hope everyone has a fantastic day, and we look forward to seeing you again in our next FODMAP chat session. Bye, everyone.
Bye, thanks.